Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this special council meeting to order. We have two items. One is we're dealing with the Canada 150 program, and then the in-camera authorization with Mr. Chapman and Mr. Wilmer away. Mr. Chapman asked if we can deal with the CIP at the start of special council in order to make sure we had staff here to answer any questions, and that's why it's not on the evening council agenda. And plus we also know we're going to have a number of delegations tonight. So with that, I will turn it over, I guess, to Ms. Fagerdahl to give us any updates on her presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Brvinovich and Council. I'm here today to provide the information requested by Council at the May 25th meeting regarding the CIP 150 application. Just to recap a little bit, on May the 15th, the federal government announced a 2-year program that will give Canadian communities $150 million, with $44 million of that money allocated to Southern Ontario. The program is available to a number of organizations, including municipalities and not-for-profit. The program is restricted to eligible categories, which include community centres, recreation facilities, cultural centres, parks and trails, libraries, and other community infrastructure assets that benefit the community. The program will fund up to 50% or $1 million, whichever is less, per project. The City can apply for as many projects as it wishes, but it must prioritize via resolution. Past applications have not always resulted in the top choices being selected, as occurred in 2013 when the Victoria Park washrooms were selected for funding, and this was ranked by Council as 7 out of 7 of the projects submitted. On the May 25th, 2015, at the conclusion of that presentation and discussion, Council passed the following 2 motions: that the project applications for the City Hall outdoor space rehabilitation, the Kiwanis Park pool rehabilitation, and the Wi-Fi and public internet access expansion be approved in principle, and that sequencing be determined on June the 1st. And that the Deputy CAO of Infrastructure Services be authorized to sign a landlord agreement form for submissions made by the Centre in the Square to improve a city facility. Motion 2, that consideration and sequencing of the Huron Natural Area Kettle Trail upgrades or the Huron Natural Area and McLennan's Parks work bundle be deferred until June the 1st. Staff was also requested to provide the full list of projects that were submitted by staff to the CAO and Deputy CAOs for consideration of funding under this program. Council also requested that the details of the additional projects be supplied during the report of the Huron Natural Area Kettle Trails upgrade and the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Parks work bundle. On May the 25th, Council deferred consideration of those additional projects pending receipt of more information from staff. Only one of those projects can be selected, as the smaller Trails project is a subset of the larger citywide parks program. Mr. Dan Ritz is here to speak to the specific of those projects and to answer any specific questions. What I offer during this presentation on the projects is the Huron Natural Trail upgrade. The total cost is expected to be approximately $800,000, and we expect to apply for 50% or $400,000. The City will have to come up with $250,000 of new funding for this project. The citywide improvements project, the total cost is expected to be approximately $2.8 million, and we expect to apply for the maximum of $1 million. New funding to be required is $1.46 million. On May the 25th, staff was also requested to provide the full list of projects that were submitted to the CAO and Deputy CAOs for consideration of funding. Included in the report is the list of the 15 projects that were submitted. The details of the process to arrive at this list are also included in the report, but I would like to highlight that this is not an exhaustive list as timelines did not allow for all staff to respond. The submission was intended only to supplement the knowledge of the CAO and the department heads so that they could arrive at a recommendation for council. Since the May 25th meeting, the museum has advised the city of its intent to apply for funding to install retrofit lighting. As a not-for-profit organization, the museum may make an independent application for projects as outlined in the program. There is expected to be no incremental cost to the city, as funding from the city will be through the regular capital contribution budget process. The museum must receive approval from the city and receive delegation of authority from the city in order to proceed. This requirement is the basis for the recommendation in the report. So today, staff is looking for approval that the Deputy CAO of Infrastructure be authorized to sign a landlord authorization form for submissions made by the museum to improve a city facility. Staff is also looking for council direction with respect to sequencing of the 3 projects submitted on May the 25th and the consideration and sequencing of the Huron Natural Trail area upgrade or the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Parks Work Bundle. Project name is Citywide Parks Improvement. And this concludes the presentation of the report.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for summarizing the 3 decisions that need to be made today. And we have a few sets of questions for you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
I actually don't have any questions, but I'm prepared to bring a motion forward at the appropriate time. Do you want to know what that is now?
Yeah, why don't you tell us what it is so people can, they have questions they can ask along the way?
Yeah, I'm just going to move that we add the additional works, the citywide park improvements, to the list.
So 4B?
Yeah, if
Okay.
that's what you want to call it. Yeah, 4B. I wrote it out on the agenda, so if you really need to put it on the screen.
And you're leaving it as 4B?
I'm just leaving it as 4 for now, but
Okay.
if committee or council wants to reprioritize any of those, I'm willing to look at options, but right now I will leave it at 4.
Okay.
If there's any amendments, then that
Yep,
can happen.
I'll come back to you then at the time of that motion. Thank you for sharing that with us. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions. In the item with regards to the center and the square, just for clarification, they themselves have applied for funding as well, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, but that's
They will be applying by June the 9th.
I'm sorry, say it again?
They will be applying by June the 9th.
Okay, but that's a city-owned building, so would that not be our city's responsibility as opposed to center and the square?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we provide a grant to them on a yearly basis, and this is an opportunity for those to supplement that funding.
So the government will accept that process?
Through you,
The federal
Mr. Chair,
government?
that's correct.
And how
Councillor
much-
Yanetsky, last week we authorized
Yeah.
the Center in the Squares application, so that's already been dealt with.
And how much money were asking for? Does anybody know?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my recollection is that they would be asking for up to $2 million, but that's not a guarantee it will all be approved.
Okay.
And that's not just for one project.
And the last question I have, at the end of the financial report, you talk about matching grants could range from $250,000 to $4.2 million. And I sort of tried to calculate that. I'm just wondering how you arrived at $4.2 million.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you take all of the city required funding for all of the projects and add them all up, it comes to $4.21 million. But for 4A and B, we had to take the maximum of 1.46 because that's the maximum that we would have to come up with. So if you take all of the projects and add them together, except for 4A, you should come up with 4.21 million.
So you're talking all the projects, you're talking the 4 or 5 projects, not the 15.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just the 4 project, and that 4.21 million is assuming that we will get approval for all of the projects.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I asked this actually last time, but I'm actually having a hard time remembering the exact response. is there an estimate on how much we, all else being equal, we can expect to receive from the federal government?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Sure. Is it like using history as an example in programs like this, and assuming that the funds were distributed equitably, is there an idea of how much money we might get from the federal government? Like, I know the range, but what's the amount that we might get if staff were to take a guess?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have that number about what the history is. I can try and look at what's happened before and respond back.
Okay.
Sorry, I can jump in. Just to be clear, this particular program does not have it's not based on a per capita basis like some of the other programs have been in the past.
Right.
So it's,
Pure
we might get none, we might get a chunk.
And it's $44 million
For all of Southern
all
Ontario.
of Southern Ontario, okay.
Oh, sorry, Mr. May, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we estimate based on past experience and the overall bucket that we stand to receive up to about $1 million.
$1 million. Okay. And sorry, Mr. May, if I could, just to continue on that. Now, would that be $1 million to the city, or does that $1 million shared then with the Centre and the Square and now the museum?
That's a discussion we had ourselves. We're not totally sure, but we would guess that it would be a geographic $1 million, so it may include those other projects.
So, hypothetically speaking, then, if the estimate is correct and the Centre and the Square is applying for $2 million, we may get none of our priority options.
That's correct. That's a potential.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I missed this discussion last week, and I was concerned about this sharing of with the museum and the center and the square. Was there much discussion on this? That it appears that we're going to have to share our $1 million. What, for example, of the three, what has the highest priority? Is it?
Well, I guess the only point that I would make is that in addition to us as a city and those two separate organizations that may have applications, I'm aware of at least two other community organizations who are putting requests in, and I anticipate there will be a number more than that will be going to the federal government for money. And so whether the city ends up getting prioritized in this or for other reasons, some of those not-for-profits become the priority of the government in their decision-making process, I don't think any of us can speculate on that.
Okay. Looking at the original listing, there seem to be limited details for a number of the projects. How is it possible to really do a fair assessment on them with...
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair. As staff noted the last time, the timelines that the federal government has created for this program frankly don't allow for a rigorous review of all of the options. Staff really had about a week's time in which to understand the federal program, look at priorities, and make recommendations to council. It was in no way a thorough vetting of every single project, but the DCAOs and the CAO met, and based on our shared understanding of the potential works, have made recommendations to council.
Yeah. I'm very surprised at the limited time that we've had with these other organizations that we belong to, like FCM and AMO. Do we not have any advanced knowledge of this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that no, staff had no advanced knowledge until the federal government made the program public.
Is it possible to complain to the senior governments as to how they do things?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's an issue that's been raised by a number of municipalities.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate that in fact, this issue is not new, and is one that FCM and others have expressed concern about before, but for whatever reason, these are the kinds of timelines they put on these things.
My final question, and I may have an amendment coming, but I'm concerned about where our share of the funding is going to come from. I notice there are indications in the report when you say capital out of current, new, what does that mean?
Ms. Fagerdahl.
Or capital out of current existing, what does that mean?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Capital current new means it's currently not in the 10-year capital forecast. Capital out of current existing means it is somewhere in the 10-year forecast. Funds have been allocated.
That project is in the forecast?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if it says capital out of current existing, it is in the 10-year forecast.
And I would be able to find those?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay.
Ms. Fagerdahl, just to clarify your one answer, based on the responses last week, all three of these projects were in the capital forecast. The only issue was some of them didn't have any dollars, so the first one didn't have any dollars attached to it yet, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the discussion last week said that at some point in time we would have to do these projects, but that's correct, that dollars had not been allocated in the 10-year forecast.
So if they're not in, the dollars aren't in the forecast, they're not in the forecast. I mean, yes, sometime we're going to have to do everything. So what I'm concerned here is that we're being forced now to spend money on projects that we hadn't planned for.
But that's the nature of the beast of these programs, unfortunately. They need to be incremental. They don't want, essentially, I mean, and these are discussions we've had with the federal government before, but essentially the federal government don't want you taking their money to pay for projects you were already going to do.
And it's not their money.
Well,
they don't want us to take our money.
Okay, well, I'm not...
No, but I'm concerned about it. Here, all of a sudden, we come along singing happy birthday, and all of a sudden, we have all kinds of extra dollars that we hadn't planned to spend that we have to spend. Okay. I would like to move an amendment that whatever program we go forward with, that we take the funding from some other project and some other project and push that other project down the line so that we don't have to introduce any new funding and nothing jumps into the front of the line.
Okay.
Okay? And I will ask for that amendment.
I will come back to you at the time. If you want to maybe write that out so there's some clarity to it. Yeah. Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the question about where the dollars will come from for the $1 million, the $4.2 million is still up in the air. We don't exactly know where we would. We may need to find 250,000, and we may need to find $1 million. We may need to find 4.2 million. We really don't know yet where that money would be coming from, except that we know that if it's capital out of current, it's taxpayers' funding dollars not allocated at present within our budget, except for maybe like a business plan or anything like that. Is that my correct understanding?
Go ahead, Ms. Fagerdahl.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The allocation of that funding would be through the regular capital budget process. That's correct.
Okay. All right. So I keep losing my questions. Sorry about that. We don't also know what would get bumped as yet, right? I mean, we're too early in the process. Until we understand what funding we may get, we won't know what funding that we would have to put in as well. So until we know the response from the federal government on how much money we're going to get, we won't know where we have to take that partner funding from.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Until we get the approval, we will not know how much we have to come up with.
Okay. So based on what I'm understanding is we are not to use projects that we've already started, that this is a new project that we have not started, and but why wouldn't we be looking at something that was sort of planned within our capital forecast in terms of allocations of some funding, even though we may not have started it yet? Would that not still fall under the proper criteria? So if something was planned for in 2017, for example, would we not be able to use that project as opposed to something like the Carl Zayre Square, which the only thing that it stated in the staff report was that it required a business plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can respond to the program requirements, and then then I may defer to Mr. May about why we did the projects that we did. Under the program, we can bring projects forward from 2017 forward. So it's incremental or bringing projects that you would not have been able to do before.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Kind of. I mean, I'm looking at both the City Hall outdoor space as a project that really was quite far out in the future, and the Wi-Fi and public internet access is something that we actually have been slowly adding to, but not necessarily anything that, was an immediate need. When I look at the Kiwanis Park, that definitely was a need that we had already identified throughout conversations I believe we had throughout 2014 about Kiwanis Park needing some additional work. So I guess that's kind of where I'm trying to come from with regards to our prioritization. So can we take items from the list that was originally prioritized 1, 2, and 3 and remove them and replace them with, for example, item number 4, which was identified as the Huron Natural Area Trail Upgrade and the citywide park improvement?
So that's a process question, and just to be clear, the motion that's been approved was we approved the first 3 in principle, and we were making a decision today on 4A or 4B. So those first 3 are there. We can potentially add a 4th one, and we can change the the prioritization of them.
Okay,
but the decision to include it, it's already there. We can't remove a project at this point.
But that was essentially what I was concerned about last week when we were talking about approving something in principle. Then essentially it is set in stone and we can't remove it. And that's one of the concerns I had last week with prioritizing these first 3 in principle and approving them in principle. But what we can do then, what I'm understanding, Mr. Mayor, is that we could move, for example, 4 up to 1 and 2 up to 2, and the other ones would fall under 3 and 4. We can do that.
You can do that, correct.
Okay. Then I hate to add complexity to all of this, but I would like to make a motion that's going to look like that once I hear what Councillor Gazzola's motion may be.
Okay, we'll consider that at the appropriate time. I will also just remind Council, and I think we should prioritize, but I will also remind Council that we provided a prioritization list last time, and the last item on our list, number 7, became the item that the federal government chose. So just want people to be aware of that as well.
Okay. Is my time up for questions?
You have 1 minute yet.
I have 1 minute yet. Okay. You know what? I'm just going to listen to if there are other questions and ask if I can come back in if I need to.
Councillor Marsh.
Just want to ask a question of staff or others, councillors who have been around for these types of things in the past. I want to understand what significance does the priority ranking have for the grantors? Are they going to consider what we thought of as first? I mean, you already just said the 7th on our list was what they funded, but so do we even rank them when we submit them?
Mr. May? sorry, I thought I clicked you in.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is a requirement that City Council ranks them, so you do have to put some priority to it. I would say we've had success in getting some of our top priorities picked, but to the Mayor's point, at the end of the day, this is a federal government program that has a federal government political process, and they have in the past chosen items far down on our list of priorities.
Okay. So we don't need to be too precious about our priority ranking system necessarily, is what I would comment on. And just to add, at a meeting last week with Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery, I learned that they are also considering putting in an application, and one of the board members said, you know what, every nonprofit that he knows of is putting one in. So we certainly can't be too worried about those that we know of, because there are plenty more that we don't even know of in our area.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Vivanovic. Councillor Marsh's questions cleared up a lot of mine, but I'd like to ask Mr. May, just for clarification, you said we expect to receive about $1 million in funding, but that's based on the projects that the CIP committee would approve. It's not a blank check that we decide what to do with.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the $1 million figure is basically taking a look at the entire program. I think it's for the Ontario component or the Southwestern Ontario component, and trying to break it down based on generally population size and what we've had in previous experiences. So it's not a hard, fast number. There may be very good political reasons that we may get more than $1 million or we may get less. But that's kind of the number staff have targeted.
Okay, so I want to be clear that we're completely at the mercy of the CIP 150 selection committee as to what projects are selected.
I would say to you, once you approve this list, yes, you are.
Okay, and then any money that we receive, say for example, if we receive the full $1 million for the citywide park improvements for Huron Natural Area, that would be $1 million of savings that we could put somewhere else.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's important to note that while not all of these projects are within the capital budget, they are all planned for one way or another. In other words, staff would be coming forward to council at some point asking for you to add these things into the budget, whether it's the City Hall outdoor spaces or the Wi-Fi. So what this will mean is we won't have to come and ask for that because the project will receive money from the federal government.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, so Councillor Fernandez.
Everybody else asked questions that they wanted to.
You're next.
Present. Okay. I wanted to ask Mr. Ritz if he wouldn't mind coming down just to clarify a couple of things for me. So I have a map of the Huron Natural Area with a couple of dotted circles regarding a couple of the trails. Would it be possible for you to prioritize the three going from left to the center to the bottom? Which one would be the one that would be most significant in its connection of the trails that are already there? Are you able to do that?
Yes, through the chair. The application is for $800,000, and what we've identified is three trail segments. The segments include a plantation trail segment, a woodland trail segment, which has been referred to as the Kettle Trail, and then the Strasburg Creek Trail segment. If we had to prioritize those pieces and made the Huron Natural Area grant smaller, it'd probably be the plantation trail and the woodland trail. And the reason for that is they're part of the Type 1 trail system going through the park.
Okay, that's good to know. So when you were coming forward with the description, essentially the three trails that you've just identified were the ones that are under the 4A description with the $800,000.
Correct. Just for clarification for council, I know earlier it was referred to as the Kettle Trail application. That's when we didn't have a lot of detail on the project at the time. We've clarified that, and we've come up with a trail expansion program for Huron Natural Area. It includes the three trail segments.
Okay. If there was this is kind of a shot in the dark, but just if there was a rationale received from the grantors of the CPI 150, saying that one of these trails needed to have some significant naming related to the 150th birthday, would you have a problem with that? Would staff see that as a positive step for making sure that these trails were done if that was a criteria that was added?
Through the chair, the trails at this point are just named for, they're not formalized names, they're just names that refer to kind of the areas in Huron Natural area. I don't think at this point that the federal government is looking to do any naming. Typically what they do is they request some signage be put acknowledging the grant.
Okay.
Mr. Tyagi, you wanted to add something?
Just to add to that, through you, Mr. Chair, I think if that became a requirement from the federal government, we certainly will bring back that to council for further discussion at that point.
Okay, thank you. So one more question. If this was to take its normal process and would be worked through the budget, what would be the estimated timeline in which you would be able to do these 3 trails?
Well, currently we have an existing funding of $150,000 that we would apply to one of these trail segments. The remaining trail segments would happen over the course of the 10-year forecast. Recognizing the limited budget of the Huron Natural general provision, that would probably take most of that 10-year forecast.
Okay, all right, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Not, I have one. So Councillor Galloway has indicated that she's moving 4B as item 4 on the prioritization list, unless somebody does an amendment. Has staff considered the prioritizations, and should 4 be number 4, or should it be somewhere in the range of 1, 2, or 3? And if you haven't taken a position, that's fine. You can just tell us that. Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't had a corporate discussion on that. What I would tell you is that we prioritized 1, 2, and 3 as the top 3 priorities, and I believe that would continue to be our position.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Galloway, and I'll come back to you for your motion.
Just to correct you, it's Galloway Seeloff.
Oh, sorry.
I know,
Apollo.
I'll probably still mess up your position too, so it's okay. I'm just moving the, on the agenda, because that was the easiest way to find the top recommendation there with 1, 2, and 3, and then adding the citywide park improvements, which is the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Park.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make just a quick?
Yeah, can I just get a seconder first? Seconded by Councillor Ioannidis. Okay, go ahead.
I said a lot already at the last meeting with regards to both the Huron Natural Area and McLennan Park. And there's a little bit more information, obviously, in this report, just that their master plans were done in 2001 and 2003, respectively. And I think that that's really important to take into account. We could embark on some new projects, which do need to be done, and I understand that, but we've got 2 great assets that we could build on and look to complete some of those aspects sooner than later. And I think that that would be a really great community-wide benefit. And then I'd also just wanted to make a quick comment. In the rare case that we were to get all 4 of our projects approved, in the rare case, because I think we all know that that's not going to happen, we would probably be able to tell the government we might not be able to complete all 4 of those on time, purely from a financial perspective. But I don't think going into it, anybody should be under the impression that we'll get all 4. But in the case, we just wouldn't be able to show that we could effectively finish all 4 in a timeline. So I think that's why we have to prioritize. And I think we should take some seriousness to the prioritization, because I do think there's a possibility that the federal government has heard from past grant applications that, when your number 7 or your number 4 is chosen, that, we rank them for a reason, and you'd like to see them done. the end of the day, we don't have a say in that, and so I think we all need to feel comfortable with the 4 moving forward, but I do think we should take some seriousness into the ranking. So with that, I hope that everyone will at least support having the citywide park improvements added to the list of priorities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola, now to your amendment.
Yes, my amendment is very simple. It states that the city's share of funding is to be provided by the postponement or reprioritizing of a specific project currently in the 2015 to 2024 capital forecast.
Okay, before I take that motion, I just want to ask a question of staff. If that in fact goes against the intent of the grant, because my understanding again is that it at least if it's consistent with former programs, is it needed to be incremental, it needed to be new investment, and it can't replace other dollars. So, Ms. Fagerdahl?
Through you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that the project has to be incremental and that it has to come either have not been in the capital forecast at all, or that we have to move money that was later in the program and move it up to the current program. As far as replacing other monies, I'm not entirely sure whether that's something that we can or cannot do, and I'd have to respond back to council.
Well, I submit that we have to provide our funding and we can decide where our funding comes from. I can appreciate that they're saying if you have a project ready to go in 2015-16, you can't put that project in the front line. But if we say, okay, we're going to participate in this, we have a project that we would have liked to have done in one of those years that we're no longer going to do. That's our source of funding. It's no different if we decide that we're going to put existing capital out of current money or new capital out of current money. Okay. I resent the fact that we come along and the senior governments come out with a program and we all of a sudden have to go into something that we hadn't planned in order to go along with their idea of ceremony. So I'm saying, fine, let's go along, let's take advantage of our money that they're making available, but let's fund our end out of something that we had already, from some programs that we will now have to change our priority on.
Listen, I will take your amendment. Is there a seconder for it? Seconded by Councillor Fernandez. Okay, but I will just say what I said earlier, and I understand your issues and your concerns with it, Councillor Gazzola, but they're not our rules. And at the end of the day, this goes back to stimulus funding. The whole idea behind it was that they wanted additional dollars coming into the system, which will create jobs and see various orders of government spending money that otherwise would not have been spent.
And if I could respond to that,
yep.
I appreciate, Mr. Mayor, that if it is stimulus funding, this isn't stimulus funding. It's here for the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the country. So it's not coming out as a stimulus funding program.
Okay.
And therefore,
that's fine. Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, so essentially my amendment was that we reprioritize the 4 items that are here and that each item be voted on separately on whether they are prioritized in 1, 2, 3, 4 or that they stay the same. I think we have to be very clear as to the cost that certainly the City Hall outdoor space rehabilitation is going to cost us, if we only get $250,000 for that, we're looking at a significant amount of dollars to do that project. We're talking about a $2 million project. So I guess my other question would be is if we only got $250,000 for a project like that, that means we have to come up with $1.75 million. Would that not be a real challenge for us to find that money and to have the project completed by 2017?
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our request of the federal government, our application will be for 50% of the project costs. So if they were to come back with a proposal like that, I'm not sure that we would accept it. We're asking for 50% of the project.
Right, I know what we're asking for. I want to know what would happen. I mean, there's a very real possibility from the discussion I've been hearing that we could end up with $1 million for a geographical area, which means, let's say, for example, as you indicated, we could get $1 million. So 250,000 could go to one project, 100 to another. I mean, who knows how they'll parcel it out, right?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, our application would be for the 50%. We'd be under no obligation to accept anything below that.
Okay. Right. So that's essentially what my
Ms. Fagerdal, you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to respond to the incrementality, if that's actually a word. So I'll wait.
Come back to you on that.
Okay. So that would be my motion, is that we reprioritize the list.
Okay. So what's the priority right now? The motion is 1 through 4 as identified. What's your alternative?
So I would move 4 up to 1, 2 would remain, 3 would be 3, and the city outdoors space would be 4.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Gazzola seconding. That's fine. I'll come to that amendment. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the amendment that's put forward by Councillor Gazzola, response to what he's proposing. And I would need a clarification from staff as well. It's not making sense to me when we already would convolute the application process by adding in further as to what other projects we may be deferring or not pursuing in a effort to better our community. I think it sends a wrong message. It's not to say that I don't agree with what Councillor Gazzola is saying. I think there is required a sober thought in looking strategically overall projects that are forecast for the next 10 years. And there may be some projects that could be deferred to compensate for the acceleration of additional funding required for this grant. But to tie it into this proposal, it's absolutely unnecessary. We have full control of our budget. And through the budget process, after this approval, if you are fortunate enough to get this granting process approved by the federal government, we can easily, carefully, and collectively prioritize as part of the budget process of future projects that we could defer, knowing well in advance that there will be necessary of having additional funding required to facilitate the granting process. So I think it doesn't make sense to include it as part of this. I think I appreciate what your direction is, but I think it would be more prudent to include or engage in that process part of the budget as opposed to tying it into this application process. I don't know if staff want to comment on that.
Councillor Gazzola, you don't have the floor right now. Councillor Gazzola, you don't have the floor right now. I'll come back to you. That's right. Councillor Singh has the Councillor Gazzola, you don't have the floor right now. Thank you. Ms. Fagerdal, you wanted to provide some additional information in response to Councillor Singh's question, as well as the issue of incrementality.
I just have the wording from the program itself. So applicants are required to attest in conjunction with their project application that the work would not be undertaken and is an incremental construction activity that would not otherwise have been constructed or constructed as quickly were it not for the funding from the CIP 150. So I hope that statement helps to clarify.
It does, and I think it speaks to exactly what I already said. It has nothing to do with our overall budgeting of future projects. Right. Because I have the floor, if I can quickly, if I still have the time allowed. As to what Councillor Gazzola had, well, first I'll say Councillor Galloway-Seeluck, I compliment her on her picking up on the need for the additional amenities for here in District Park and as well as McLennan Park, and hoping that we may get this included into the granting. And for what Councillor Fernandez is putting forward, I'm a little bit struggling with this, but I do see a shifting in the priority. I have, I think, made comments in earlier council meeting saying that the what we are proposing, even for it to be a 50% cost to us for what's required for outside City Hall improvements, what's being proposed is, I think, far and above and beyond of just a facelift. City Hall outside space does require facelift, but what's being proposed are extensive measures. Not to say they're not important, perhaps, but I think they are nice to have and not necessarily what we can afford at this time. So I would support of that item to be ranked lower.
Okay, Councillor Marsh.
I just want to seek clarification from Councillor Gazzola. My understanding of the amendment is not necessarily that it would go right into the proposal that we would find our funding from our current capital forecast, but just an assurance today that we're not going to add to the overall budget amount based on a successful grant. Is that correct?
Councillor Gazzola? Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to respond to the previous question.
Councillor Gazzola, if you can please respond to Councillor Marsh if you're inclined.
My concern is, yes, that it is an important part of this resolution that we passed today, and it should form part of it. It does nothing to cloud the issue with the senior governments that are granting the money. They're saying that you have a project here that you want to spend money fixing up the City Hall. And they're saying, well, that cannot be one of your 2015, 2016 projects. I understand that, and I appreciate that. And what I'm saying is if we decide to do that, that in those years, if we may have had another project where we're going to build a gateway to heaven, and we're saying, no, we won't do that. Instead, we're going to go and join the birthday party.
That
right?
part's clear. I'm just asking.
That's an integral part of our resolution, so that going forward, we don't mess with our budgets that we already have in place.
Right. But are you suggesting that, as Councillor Singh was intimating, that this might be, if your amendment passed, that then we would request staff to put that into their proposal? Are you asking that or not?
I'm asking that we do not spend monies that we don't have. That's basically what I'm asking.
But it doesn't have to go in the proposal to the government.
If we're going to pass this resolution, it should join hand in hand with the resolution.
Well, I would have supported it.
I'm trying to give folks some latitude here, but this isn't a debate between two individuals. So, Councillor Marsh, you have the floor. If you want to make your point, feel free.
I would like to support Councillor Gazzola's concept that we don't say, all right, the federal government's going to give us a bunch of money, so let's up our budget even more to match their funding. I'm in agreement in principle, but I also am in agreement with Councillor Singh to say, hey, we don't need to promise what we're going to take off the forecast for next year if they give us money. We can decide that at budget time. We don't need to decide that today.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I was going to start by saying exactly what Councillor Marsh finished with. We have a budget process we go through to determine exactly what Councillor Gazzola's motion is speaking to. If anything, it seems more appropriate to bring forward a motion of this, or it's an amendment, bring forward a motion at a later date once we actually know what the quantum is in terms of how much we're going to have to buck up. But to approve it here complicates the process. We can deal with this through budget. in principle, I agree. We shouldn't be spending more money just because the federal government comes along, but that's not within our control at this point. So I won't be supporting that. To be frank, I wasn't terribly interested in supporting adding anything to this list because I was worried about the political rationale versus staff coming forward with it independently. I've changed my mind on that, not the least of which is because there's a very good possibility if this entire city of Kitchener gets $1 million, it could go to the center and the square and we get nothing that were on our list. It could go to the museum and we get nothing on our list. So it's not a huge amount of money in that context. So I'm fine adding it. What I do not particularly appreciate is when people are fiddling with the priority list. And to take an item that staff deemed not in the top 4 and to rank it number 1, I think is something that's we're treading in the political ground here. I don't think that's appropriate. So I will support the original motion. I will not support either of the amendments.
Councillor Gazzola?
Is this the wrap up on?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I'm amazed how you people can talk about doing things in principle, and that's all I'm trying to do here. Is I'm not asking this afternoon when you pass this resolution that you don't go ahead with whatever projects, and quite frankly, I couldn't care less as to which project is number 1 and which is number 10. My only concern is we're being forced to spend some monies that we hadn't planned to do, so let's stand up in principle and say, okay, we'll go along with it, but we'll make the decision, and not at budget time. We don't need to make it today, but we need to approve that principle that we're going to do whatever happens when whatever we're allocated, whatever happens at that point, we make a decision as to where the funding comes from, and it doesn't come from something. Our funding needs to be changed. I'm asking you. You're always doing so many things approving in principle. Well, here's a simple, very simple, basic principle that I'm asking you to approve as part of this, as part of our request to going forward and spending our taxpayers' money on something we hadn't planned to do.
It's fine. Councillor Ioannidis?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. At this point, I think our best option, if we want to succeed in getting our funding, is just to be simplistic and not convolute the whole process, which I think has been happening right now. So I'm prepared to support the original recommendation. In addition to, I am going to change my mind and add the parks in there. I think it gives us one more dynamic in there that's not with the 3 options. So I think I won't be supporting either amendment or the prioritization.
Councillor Fernandez?
I guess my last sort of word on this is I understand completely where Councillor Gazzola is coming from, and maybe if it gives you any comfort, we've all heard exactly what you're saying, and if we don't add it into the proposal, but we do have an understanding in principle of what you're saying, and maybe that needs to be a completely separate motion after we've passed however the motion is going to go in terms of the list and the prioritization. But a separate motion be brought forward after that we are very clear that the funding source would mean reprioritizing something that's already there. Does that meet with a bit more approval from the rest of council if I was to put that as a completely separate motion after we voted on the on the Canadian 150 infrastructure program?
Okay, folks. Councillor Singh, guys, we're already 10 after 5.
Yeah,
I don't want to go through a second.
My effort isn't to keep on going back and forth, Mayor Urbanovic. I think I had keyed in, but
no, I know I had you in the queue.
Councillor Fernandez had started speaking to something similar to what I was going to say, and that's why I said more for a motion for a point of clarification. Perhaps it can be just direction for whatever is approved, part of the funding, that staff be directed to bring back an issue paper part of budget. to look at other projects that could be reprioritized. It speaks to what you're trying to do, Councillor Gazzola, and doesn't tie anything exclusively to the application process. That's something I would be willing to support if you can change your motion or amendment.
Ms. Fagerdahl?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to state that the resolution, as passed, must be included on all applications. So I just wanted to remind that.
So, and I'm just, folks, I understand the frustration with the federal government and so on, but at the end of the day, this is their program, and they can do what they want with it. We have a choice. We can either choose to apply and try to get our share of dollars, what we think is our share of dollars, or we can say, you know what, we want to pass this time and we don't want to go after any of the dollars. And so, personally, I want to go after a chance of getting some of those dollars to move forward projects that are important to our municipality and that one way or another we would have to fund at some point. By doing that, if we get any of these projects or more than one of these projects, it will free up dollars overall for us to be able to do some of the other priorities that we know are on our capital needs list in our community. I really want to caution people, and while I understand where Councillor Gazzola is coming from, I want to caution people about going down that route because it potentially will put our application in jeopardy in terms of what's required by the federal government. And personally, I'm not prepared to do that. Secondly, in terms of the reprioritization, I share Councillor Davies' concerns about starting to reprioritize projects that have gone through our senior management team, and they've reviewed it and given us their estimation of what is appropriate in this regard. I'm willing to support Councillor Galloway-Seelock's addition of that project because, as has been said, I think it adds another type of dimension that if that happens to capture the federal government in a way, it may be a good thing in terms of getting their attention around trails and so on, particularly as it relates to linking trails and the Trans-Canada Trail and so on, which is another priority the feds have for 2017. So that may make it a priority for them. So I will deal with Councillor Gazzola's motion first, and then I will deal with Councillor Fernandez's amendment, and then I will deal with the main motion. And recorded votes have been called. So first of all, Councillor Gazzola's amendment. Do you have it, Madam Clerk, or do you want Councillor Gazzola to repeat it? Can you repeat it, Councillor Gazzola, please? Hold on, I need to turn on.
City's share of funding to be provided by the postponement / reprioritizing of a specific project currently in the 2015 to 2024 capital forecast, period.
Okay, so all those...
want to participate in getting some of our federal money back. So I don't want it to be said that I don't have any interest in that.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. So all those in favor of the amendment? Well, everyone can vote, rather, in favor or opposed. Okay, vote again if you haven't voted. Is anybody left? Okay. All those in favor? Councillor Gazzola, if you can stand, please. Sorry. All those opposed? Motion does not carry. Councillor Fernandez's amendment, which made 4B number 1, 2 and 3 remain the same, and number 1 becomes number 4. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion, that motion carries. So the motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to go in camera for the items listed. Moved by Councillor Ionita, second by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe there's one motion you still have to take regarding the museum.
Oh, yes. Who's Councillor Davey? Councillor Dave? Oh, okay. Motion for Centre in the Square. Moved by Councillor Fernandez, seconded by Councillor Singh. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Ms. Fagerdahl, if you can... Sorry, yeah, the museum. Sorry for clarifying. That was for the museum, not the Centre in the Square, just for clarity. Okay? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah.